There are many shows dedicated to Magic the Gathering strategies, decks, and formats. But unlike all of them, this channel is about discussing an individual card, an isolated card, an unrelated card. This is an Magic card. Howdy y'all, and welcome to episode number 9 of the YouTube channel equivalent of those cars that get run over during a monster truck rally. My name is supposedly Dusty Cupboards, and I'm back again to exhaustively discuss a randomly selected card of magical gatheringness. Let's take a quick look at the comments from the previous video though, and see if there's anything that needs to be addressed. My good friend Nathan Lynch inquired if I might be a Fall Out Boy fan. At first this perplexed me, and then I realized that Fall Out Boy has a song titled Get Busy Living or Get Busy Dying, a quote which I referenced at the end of my last video.
This has been said so many times.
And while I do occasionally enjoy a Fall Out Boy song, this quote is actually attributed to Stephen King and is famously featured in the film Shawshank Redemption, which is based on his short story and stars Brendan Fraser and Morgan Freeman. IRL Fine Gaming, 888 Ian 2, and myself had a brief back and forth discussing the history of retcons in Magic the Gathering. I did originally intend to discuss Gideon Jura's original backstory, which was retconned out of existence, but as is the case with most of these videos, I simply ran out of time. At some point in the future, when I discuss every other card in the history of Magic the Gathering, I will probably at least mention it. The next comment is purely gesticular in nature, as the last video I posted, episode number 8, not only received thumbs up, but also a thumbs down. This is the first thumbs down this channel has ever gotten, and I take great pride in accomplishing this feat. Once your videos start getting dislikes, that's how you know you're big time. Vintage Masters is currently available online for draft, and in a video by Kenji Numat the Nummy Igashira, posted just 12 hours ago, Kenji faced a foe who is running Skirk Drill Sergeant, the card which we featured in episode number 6. Not only did his opponent play Skirk Drill Sergeant, but they also activated its ability and managed to hit a goblin off the top of their library. I'm pretty sure Kenji's face here pretty much says it all. With that out of the way, let's clasp our hands together and journey forward to discover the card we shall be discussing this week, one of the most powerful cards in the history of Magic the Gathering. Alright, you know the routine. This is the card from last week. This is Near Death Experience. Pretty cool card, pretty neat card. Got the From the Vault printing as well. But let's go ahead and move on right along and see what we get this time. It is It's this one. I think I own this card. I think I actually have this card in my collection. Well, that's kind of weird. It says there's two versions, but they seem to be the same. I think the one that I have this one with the lady with the horse. That looks wildly familiar to my eyes. Let's talk about this thing. It's yep. That's a magic card. Dwarven Trader is a red 1-mana 1/1 dwarf from Homelands, the 7th set in the history of Magic the Gathering. As mentioned previously, Homelands released between Ice Age and Alliances, and therefore was once considered part of that frosty cool block, but it was very reasonably supplanted by the chilly set Cold Snap in 2006. Released on Saturday, October 14th, 1995, Homelands coincided with several important historical events. If you were attending the Homelands release event in New York City, you were likely chatting with the other attendees about the October 3rd not guilty verdict that concluded the widely publicized murder trial of Orenthal James Simpson. I'm not sure how old my viewers are, but I remember exactly where I was on that day. At 8 years old, I was accompanying my father on a routine errand up to the university where he still works to this very day. The news of the verdict came over the radio right before we had parked the 1980-something Toyota hatchback and began to ascend the steep hill that leads to the office where he still works to this very day. I don't recall hearing the verdict, but I do recall my father talking to me about it as we walked up the sidewalk that ran alongside the large parking lot, which is now a practice field for the collegiate football team. I don't recall if my father had a strong opinion on the actual verdict, although I remember him scoffing at the media circus which had been made of the whole trial, and I remember with an almost photographic clarity the low-lying juniper bushes that lined that parking lot adjacent sidewalk. At the time, I had no idea that O.J. Simpson had been a football player, and despite the nominal similarity, I was pretty sure he didn't have anything to do with the Simpsons TV show. To me, first and foremost, O.J. Simpson was a very talented physical comedian from the Naked Gun film series, and I was relieved to hear that he wouldn't be sent to jail for a crime he did not commit. Of course, now it is very obvious that he did in fact kill his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend Ron Goldman. Not just because of the weird ways he has tacitly confirmed this over the years for attention, but because of the history of domestic violence, deceit, and narcissism he displayed in the many years leading up to the murders. Knowing what I now know about him, I certainly feel like the verdict should have gone the other way. But I'll be honest that the part of me that likes the Naked Gun movies still possesses a fondness for him that I cannot fully shake. I think admitting this is important because O.J. Simpson is an abuser and a manipulator, and the fact that he retains a certain likability is not an indication that he should be given grace, but a warning that the most dangerous people you'll ever meet might be the charming ones you can't help but feel drawn to. If you were at the 1995 release of Homelands and have any sort of recollection about what the general consensus was towards the verdict of the highly publicized murder trial of Orenthal James Simpson, leave a comment letting me know. Homelands was notable for being the first set with an international release, which is kind of fitting given the set's name. You could run down to your local game store and purchase an 8-card booster pack of Homelands in countries all over the world, from Spain and Germany to Italy, France, and even Portugal. Truly a globe-spanning release. And it's fitting then that the set symbol for Homelands is a globe. The globe shown in the set symbol isn't our own blue marble, but the plane of Olgratha. As a child, I had no idea that Homelands took place on Olgratha, rather than the default plane of Dominaria, and perhaps this foreshadows some of the set's many failures. Unlike planes like Mirrodin, which is completely covered in shiny metal, or Zendikar, which is drenched in hedrons, Olgratha doesn't have many strong visual cues. Through my amazing ability to read about things on the internet, I can explain to you in conveniently simple terms, though, that the plane of Olgratha used to be rich in mana and home to two warring factions of powerful wizards and planeswalkers. These magical bungholes simply would not stop fighting, and so one of them, a young planeswalker named Ravi, decided to ring the famed Apocalypse Chime, an artifact of immense power, which literally killed almost all of the living things on that plane and turned it into a barren wasteland. Good going, Ravi. She didn't actually know the extent of the destruction it would cause, but still, come on, Ravi. What are you doing? The set Homelands takes place a few generations after this event, wherein the once noteworthy and desirable plane of Olgratha has now become an absolute dump. The primary seat of authority for the plane has fallen upon the vampire lord, Baron Sengir, who seeks to dominate the downtrodden residents and rule them with an iron fist. The story of Homelands is kind of like the development of a troubled nation, and several planeswalker visitors came to the plane to try and help it bounce back. Specifically Sarah, who is famous for her angels, and her future husband Faraz, who is well known for his ban. An abbey was founded to honor Sarah, and Faraz started a wizard school on the floating island, because that sounds cool as heck, right? Well, unfortunately, the floating island isn't actually a floating island. It's just a regular island. Welcome to Olgratha, where literally nothing is cool. Faraz also took an apprentice in the fledgling planeswalker Sandrew, who is a Minotaur man. This all seems like a good start to reforming the devastated plane, but then on one of his planeswalking excursions, Sandrew met a planeswalker named Christina, and Christina fell in love with him, which should come as no surprise, because he is a very handsome Minotaur. This caused a bit of an issue though, because the super powerful planeswalker Taser was himself in love with Christina, and decided to make Sandrew disappear, so that he could pursue her without competition. Taser came to Olgratha, and banished Sandrew to a distant plane, before Faraz could intervene and put a sword into Taser's head, which sounds pretty fatal, but Taser is second only to Urza in his ability to craft powerful plot armor. Taser would later die for real, at the hands of Urza, but honestly there's a chance he's just somehow still alive, because Taser was just kind of like that. If you're mostly familiar with newer planeswalkers, like Gideon, who we rambled about a whole lot in our last episode, it might sound wild that these characters can have their skulls cleaved open and then just simply walk away, but that's what things were like in the days of old walkers. After Sandrew was banished from Olgratha, Faraz died in an accident, and then Sarah just left. If that sounds wildly anticlimactic, then I think you might be starting to see where things went wrong with Homelands. Without these planeswalkers working to turn things around, the Dark Baron Sengir was free to just take over the entire plane, and as far as we know, the place is now one giant vampire fiefdom. Baron Sengir had also rescued the planeswalker Ravi, who had hidden in a magical coffin after ringing the Apocalypse Chime. Unfortunately, she didn't know how to open the coffin from the inside, and had been trapped inside of it for centuries, which which made her shrivel up like a raisin and go totally insane. She is now known as Grandmother Sengir, and after ruining the entire world, she has become an evil old lady with Bride of Frankenstein hair and also a terrible magic card. Way to go, Ravi. Really just nailing it, Ravi. Amongst the many races that eke out a meager existence on the backwater world of Olgrotha are humans, orcs, goblins, minotaurs, and dwarves. The dwarves are somewhat special because unlike the other races, which are just pathetic remnants of their pre-devastation ancestors, the dwarves actually found the plane of Olgrotha by traveling through a planar gate. These portals are something less frequently seen in modern magic because their existence kind of removes what makes planeswalkers special. The portal on Olgrotha is deep underground, and when the dwarves from some other world discovered it, they took up residence in the subterranean realms and started doing typical dwarf stuff like trading. The creature type present on Dwarven Trader is one of its most important features, which is potentially somewhat obvious considering its general lack of other features. A 1/1 creature for 1 mana is nothing new, and other than being a dwarf, this card is functionally identical to Mon's Goblin Raiders from the very first Magic set Alpha. Even in that original Magic set, Mon's Goblin Raiders was simply a worse version of Goblin Balloon Brigade. And in the 1 year and 2 months since that most ancient of Magic sets was released, there had been multiple other cards that match or exceed the standards set by Mon's Goblin Raiders. Alibaba from Arabian Nights can tap walls, which is honestly a brilliant mechanical allusion to the famous Open Sesame line quoted in its flavor text. Her Jackal from that very same set can tap to prevent a creature from regenerating, although notably it won't prevent a non-creature artifact from regenerating. Curd Ape is just another 1/1 for 1 red mana, unless of course you happen to control a forest, in which case it's a 2/3 for 1 mana, which is pretty neato. Goblin Artisans is another version of Mon's Goblin Raiders, with upside, as it has the extremely useful ability of being able to tap in response to you casting an artifact spell, which will then make you flip a coin. And then if you win the flip, you get to draw a card, but if you lose the flip, then that artifact spell is countered and goes to your graveyard. This card is a great example of somebody trying to use a card's mechanics to convey a flavorful concept and not really succeeding. It's basically the opposite of Alibaba, and the tiny text is a clear red flag that this one probably should have gone back to the drawing board. Speaking of tiny text, next we've got Primordial Ooze, which grows bigger whenever it attacks, and then requires you to pay mana or it hurts you. The illustration on this card makes Primordial Ooze kind of look like poop, and functionally, it's also kind of poop. We've got more knockoff Mon's Goblin Raiders in Goblin Digging Team, which shares Alibaba's animus towards walls, and Goblins of the Flarg, who have the ability Mountain Walk, but will die instantly if you so much as look at a dwarf. In Fallen Empires, orcs take the place of goblins, with Orcish Captain, which kind of does the same thing as Goblin Artisans, except instead of countering artifacts, it can either empower or kill an orc you control, as well as Orcish Spy, allowing you to look at the top 3 cards of any player's library. That's actually kind of good. Orcish Spy also has multiple artworks. I'll talk more about that in a minute. In the set Ice Age, we had the greatest 1/1 for 1 of all time, Mountain Goat, which has Mountain Walk, just like Goblins of the Flarg, but will not die in the presence of dwarves. Not only does the card Mountain Goat make Goblins of the Flarg look like trash, but it is also evocative of the California indie rock band The Mountain Goats, which is fronted by John Darnielle, who is known for being an avid Magic player and who has on occasion signed copies of Mountain Goat. I saw John Darnielle perform live at a festival I played in 2015, and that same night I stopped by a local game store and observed a large gathering of cardboard conjurers engaged in friendly competition. If I knew then what I know now, I would have considered buying some copies of Mountain Goat and then asking Mr. Darnielle if he would sign them for me. Orcish Lumberjack is another 1 mana 1/1 that takes advantage of forests by sacrificing them for mana, and as a small child my favorite deck revolved around harnessing this amazing power alongside Curd Ape, Tinderwall, Lightning Bolt, Fireball, and the spell Channel. The Channel Fireball part of the deck did most of the work, but the Lumberjacks certainly didn't hurt. After all of this, we finally get to Homelands, where the dwarves are trading. And even in that set, we have the card Dwarven Pony, which could be seen as a strictly better version of Dwarven Traders. Dwarven Pony actually comes directly before Dwarven Traders in the set order, which makes sense if you understand how the alphabet works. After Dwarven Traders is yet another copy of Dwarven Traders, because Homelands, like some of the sets that came directly before it, were really big on alternate artwork. Nowadays, alternate art is generally seen as being a special thing for promotional products, and hard to get cards. Early on though, Wizards of the Coast was worried that if they reprinted a card card with the same artwork, it would hurt the collectability of previous printings. So they wanted to give every reprinting a new artwork, except for core sets, which would be distinguished by having white borders. They also thought that it would make cards more fun to collect if they printed otherwise underwhelming commons with multiple artworks within the same set. I'm pretty sure they realized pretty quickly that it just made things a bit tedious, and that it made recognizing what a card was from across the table much more difficult. They stopped including multiple arts for cards in a given set, and they also stopped being so finicky about using new art on reprints. And I think both of these were good choices. The card which comes after the second version of Dwarven Trader in Homelands is Aaron the Reckless, a rugged rascal who stole one of Grandmother Sengir's magical tomes, made himself immortal, and now rules over the goblins in the Koskan Mountains of Olgrotha. One time he got captured and escaped from prison by literally cutting himself into pieces. That's bafflingly absurd and makes me appreciate him a lot more, even if he's not as good looking as some of the other Goblin Kings. So considering now that Wizards of the Coast has any idea what they are doing, why would they include a card like Dwarven Trader alongside a card like Dwarven Pony, which is the exact same thing but with an ability? Well, that pony actually gives us a clear hint, by only being able to target dwarves with its Mountain Walk granting ability. Tribal cards like goblins and orcs and dwarves and noggles don't exist in a vacuum. Tribal support and tribal payoffs are always cumulative, meaning that your deck will need to have enough creatures or spells with that tribal type to achieve the desired synergy. Early on, Wizards of the Coast was a bit too loosey-goosey with creature types, which made it difficult for many of the tribes to gain traction. It was fun having ferrets and carriages and narwhals, albatrosses, autocrats, bureaucrats, and heroes, but when Dwarven Pony only works with dwarves, and the set literally only has one dwarf card in it, then that's a bit of an issue. In 2007, Wizards of the Coast enacted the
Grand Creature Type Update,
which reclassified many old creatures into more reasonable categories. Those autocrats are now humans. The bureaucrats are now human advisors. Beast walkers are now human beast soldiers, which is still kind of weird. Albatross? That's a bird. Narwhal? That's a whale. Carriage? Yeah, that's just horses tied to a bunch of wood. Ferrets? Those are actually still ferrets. And thank goodness. It's not Olgrotha without ferrets. Wizards of the Coast actually hasn't printed another ferret card in the past 25 years, but they kept the creature type around, so we can only assume they've got plans. The notion that a creature type lends value to a card is not unwarranted though, especially since they've become more intentional about limiting the tribes they support. Therefore, Mon's Goblin Raiders is better than Dwarven Trader, despite not having any functional difference as a singular card. The Goblin payoffs are simply better, and they likely always will be, but it is worth noting that dwarf payoffs exist. In general with these videos, I try not to spend too much time talking about current events or recent releases, at least not more than any other era of the game. There are many Magic the Gathering YouTube channels which post videos every day about new Magic cards, controversies, and events. I would like this YouTube channel to primarily be historic in nature, so that any individual who finds my terrible videos a year from now can enjoy them about as much as somebody watching them today. Support for the dwarf tribe, though, is rare enough throughout the history of Magic that I have to spend some time talking about the recent and very recent additions to this tribe's incentives. I would say that throughout the history of Magic the Gathering, there have been 4 primary eras of dwarf support. The first of these eras I will simply refer to as the early years, as we see dwarves spread throughout the early sets of Magic, with some tribal interactions, but not enough of a presence to ever be taken seriously. In Apocalypse, dwarves return briefly before appearing in the following Odyssey block in respectable numbers, and with some legitimate tribal support like Dwarven Recruiter and Dwarven Bloodboiler. On the plane nocturnally known as Shadowmoor, we find a handful of dwarves, although whimsical and weird looking of course, and despite not having a lot of dwarf tribal synergies, for the first time they are white in addition to being red. After this, it would be a full 8 years before dwarves returned on Kaladesh, but they came back strong, again in red and white, and with some good tribal supports, and more importantly, some good cards that see actual play. Since Kaladesh, we've gotten a few new dwarves here and there, but this year with the impending release of Kaldheim, we're getting a bunch more, and cardboard conjurers the globe over are taking a look back to see what dwarves from the distant past might have newfound uses. Dwarven Trader itself has not seen much of a spike in demand, and currently sits at around 20 cents for both versions, but despite the price tag, it is still likely to see a lot more play. We've had a couple of dwarf legends before, including a number that aren't red or white white for some reason, like Revka and Inri, both from Homelands, but none of them have really made a big impact on Dwarven trader playability. Torbran has quickly become a mainstay red group slug commander in EDH, and in the 1,823 decks he has featured on EDH Rec, Dwarven trader only shows up in 6 of them. DePaula from Kaladesh actually cares about dwarves, and she still only has Dwarven trader in 9 of her 848 decks. Magda is the new dwarf legend from Kaldheim though, and she's raising a lot of eyebrows. Not only does she care about dwarves, but specifically she cares about the sheer quantity of dwarves. Magda herself only costs 2 mana, and her ability gives you a treasure whenever a dwarf gets tapped, so suddenly 1 mana dwarves are a bit of a hot commodity. This card hasn't even been released yet, and already we're seeing Dwarven trader appearing in 21 of those decks. That's nearly 30%. This more than doubles the play rate that Dwarven trader had previously seen in EDH. There are only 8 red dwarves ever printed, which cost 1 mana, not including Universal Automaton. It's likely that many Magda decks are simply going to want to run all of these, and as more people make Magda decks, the more Dwarven traders we're likely to see. Goblins are still a much better tribe than dwarves, but for the first time, Dwarven trader is in more decks on EDH Rec than its old school goblin equivalent. There is still a nagging issue at the heart of all of this discussion though, and that's the very notion of dwarves as a tribe in fantasy fiction. Originally, Magic the Gathering didn't have human as a creature type, but there were always human cards, and while their humanity might have been seen as a default which didn't need to be spelled out, there has never been a time where dwarves within the game of Magic were also humans, despite the obvious fact that dwarfs in real life are simply human beings with dwarfism. This issue obviously extends beyond the game of Magic and leads back to ancient folklore, with a massive pit stop in the pages of J.R.R.R. Tolkien. In The Lord of the Rings, the mythology which inspired it, and the many franchises which have been inspired by it, dwarves are fantastical creatures akin to elves or trolls. In specific, we find that many fantasy races like elves, goblins, gnomes, trolls, imps, brownies, fairies, and dwarves all homogenize as we go further back in time. They are all vaguely described as being mischievous spirits, sometimes small in stature, but always magical in nature. The term dwarfism, which is used in a medical sense to describe both animals and human beings of short stature, actually comes from the mythological term, so that connection has existed for a long time. The term dwarf itself is not offensive, but it's important to acknowledge that dwarfs are human beings and not a race of mythological creatures like goblins or noggles. In the 2017 paper, Cultural Representations of Dwarfs and Their Disabling Effects on Dwarfs in Society, Aaron Pritchard of Liverpool Hope University writes that in many ways dwarfism is a social disability, meaning that the biggest negative consequences it has on those affected is the way they are treated by others in our society, and our society's inability to create environments where they can flourish. This paper discusses a lot of the ways in which the media portrays dwarves, as both freaks to be used for entertainment and as mythological beings to be gawked at. While fantasy depictions of dwarves are pretty clearly not the most damaging, it is also true that one-dimensional depictions of bearded dwarves with Viking helmets and axes does detract greatly from the reality that dwarfs are regular people with all the depth and variety that our species is capable of. I'm not sure if I've ever heard anybody actually calling for the de-othering of dwarves in fantasy fiction, and I'm not sure that that would be practical or productive. If all dwarves in Magic were changed to be humans, or humans with some sort of dwarf subclass, the ramifications would be huge, and the upside is somewhat questionable. One of the things which I've come across multiple times in researching dwarf representation is the simple desire to see dwarfs shown as well-rounded individuals who deserve respect. And while non-human categorization seems a bit troubling on a foundational level, I think Wizards of the Coast has actually been doing a pretty good job of this recently. While Torbran and the dwarves from Eldraine are storybook cutouts, as was kind of the larger intention of that plane, the dwarves shown in the new Kaldheim set, and especially throughout Kaladesh, feel like real people. And while their predilection for artifice remains, their stature is not really a primary focus, and they are not presented in a comical way. The presence of female dwarves, non-white dwarves, and even male dwarves who don't have a beard for no specific reason helps make these characters seem like individuals and not flat depictions of a tired trope. I am in no way confident that this conclusion I've come to is adequate, and I encourage you to let me know how you feel about the topic. And more importantly, I encourage you to visit sites like lpaonline.com to read about the community that exists to push for the rights of individuals with these particular physical conditions. I was surprised I couldn't find more information on how people with dwarfism feel about the representation in fantasy, and most of the search results I got were dominated by Peter Dinklage interviews. In terms of depicting people of short stature, I'm very very happy that both of the artworks for Dwarven Trader are relatively respectful. It's neat that the two paintings form a little panoramic, although it's a bit irksome that the artwork relating to the A version is clearly meant to be the second of the two. This is the first illustration we've seen on this channel that has multiple artworks, although conveniently they are actually just part of one larger painting, and they are both done by Margaret Organ Keane. Margaret Organ Keane, sometimes abbreviated as MOK, is a classic early magic artist, and her style is easy to spot and absolutely wonderful. MOK only illustrated 27 cards in her time contributing to Magic the Gathering, but her signature stylistic elements and the overall quality of her work makes even the least useful of these cards more memorable due to featuring her artwork. Lion's Eye Diamond is easily the most significant card she ever illustrated, and I am currently filled with a deep regret for having not purchased one in the past, as it has practically doubled in price in the past few days. I think it's fair to refer to MOK's whimsical fantasy style as being folk art influenced, and the signature patterning that can be found in almost all of her illustrations is reminiscent of quilting or mosaic. I appreciate the way she allows her paintings to be paintings and doesn't feel beholden to create realistic depictions of anything in particular. Among all of her pieces, Cloak of Confusion might be my favorite, but she clearly has a knack for depicting horses, as they appear in a high percentage of her work, including Dwarven Pony, and the better half of Dwarven Trader. Again here we see Dwarven women without beards, and they seem to be real people. The flat watercolor style imparts these paintings with a sense of age, and when her pieces land correctly, they are timeless and serene. When I saw that I was discussing cards illustrated by Margaret Organ Keane, I was both excited by the opportunity to give her excellent work more attention, but also keenly aware that she had just recently done an interview with Magic Untapped. I didn't even try to send her an email, partly because it's depressing sending people emails constantly and never hearing back, but also because if you want to know more about her process and how she came to make art for Magic the Gathering, you can just head over to magicuntapped.com and read that interview. They also have a YouTube channel. I'm subscribed to that YouTube channel. I'm not crazy about their logo and aesthetic choices, but they seem like good people, and honestly, my aesthetics are literally trash, so who am I to judge? Beyond its artwork and setting, and the implications of dwarves as a fantasy race, and the widely publicized murder trial of Orenthal James Simpson, it's important to also acknowledge that Dwarven Traders is a vanilla creature. If you've never played Magic the Gathering before, and you just accidentally dropped your keyboard and it brought you to this video by pure chance, then you might not be aware what the term vanilla creature means in the context of Magic the Gathering. Creature cards often have abilities, but unlike the other card types, through having power and toughness, and sometimes a relevant creature type, creature cards have inherent value without having any other words in their text box. Whether it's a defensive 0/5 turtle for 1 mana, or a 1/1 for 0 mana, or a big butt 2/10 for 4 mana, or a legendary 2/2 for 1 mana, or a snowy 2/2 for 1 snow mana, or a 3/3 for 2 mana of different colors, or a 10/10 for 5 mana all of the same color. Sometimes you don't need anything more than a body to be a very real Magic card. I take slight issue here with the word vanilla being used to denote something that lacks distinct flavor, because let's be real here, vanilla is delicious. At this point in our comfy, junk food-fueled, nutritional desert of a candy-coated dystopia, it might seem odd that things like saccharine sweetness were once a rarity, but there was a day when things like sugar and chocolate and vanilla were exotic and expensive commodities. Natural vanilla is still relatively expensive, as it is harvested from orchids native to Mesoamerica. You might occasionally also consume products with imitation vanilla, which can be made from castoreum, which is still listed on the product label as being a natural flavoring, because technically it has a natural origin. Castoreum is the product of castor glands, which are found on adult North American beavers. I wish I was making this up, but apparently beaver scent glands smell like vanilla, and you might legitimately be consuming beaver excretion in some vanilla flavored products. Regardless if your vanilla flavoring is coming from Mexican flowers or a Canadian beaver, you're on a one-way train to Flavor Town. Vanilla is good. Using vanilla to describe something bland or nondescript is simply nonsense. There are plenty of things that lack flavor, like water, or air, or sand. Comparing vanilla to water is like comparing Advil to LSD. Since I started this channel, I have known that someday I would end up being tasked with reviewing a quote-unquote vanilla creature, under the presumption that I would struggle to find anything worth discussing about a card so devoid of mechanical features. But this expectation ignores a couple of crucial factors. First of all, I could spend literally an hour talking about pretty much anything. It's an intrinsic feature of who I am as a person to take any concept and dissect it further and further until I am scrutinizing the very particles of its being. Secondly, while the term vanilla is a true misnomer, attributing flavorlessness to something by comparing it to one of the most popular and delicious flavors known to mankind, in the context of magic cards, it is actually quite appropriate. Dwarven Trader is actually a vanilla creature because it is similarly delicious. Magic cards, like ice cream and cupcakes, and anything else which might contain vanilla or beaver extract, exists at a baseline that is already delectable. You don't need a skull clamp or a Muragonda petroglyph to make it good. Looking at a vanilla card from what is arguably the worst set in the history of Magic the Gathering is about as low as you can go. It's the cardboard equivalent of a gas station milkshake. But how bad can a gas station milkshake really be? A gas station milkshake is still a milkshake. With Dwarven Trader, we've got great artwork, potentially problematic, but evocative fantasy lore, the fundamental layout of magic cards, which strikes a great balance between form and function, and some flavor text, which I haven't even discussed yet. Where some people might see a vanilla card lacking in distinct flavor, I see a vanilla card chocked full of entrancing glandular discharge. I see a vanilla card overflowing with wonderful vanilla flavor. If you thought there was any chance I would struggle to talk about a vanilla creature card, then the flavor text on these cards should be a clear indicator that that is not the case. The flavor text is there if you need a little bit of extra spice, but for me, I don't even need it. One small vanilla milkshake, please. Hold the sprinkles. Alright everybody, that is the end of episode number 9. I hope you enjoyed it. Huge shout out to my 4 Patreons. If you would like to join them, please visit www.patreon.biz/sillyvideos. The next video is episode number 10, which seems like a pretty neat milestone. I would have had this video out sooner, but I got food poisoning. I just kept throwing up. It was gnarly. Let me know if you have any input about the representation of dwarfs in fantasy fiction. Let me know the best vanilla milkshake you've ever had, and explain to me the inner turmoil you feel about your deep love for the Naked Gun films. And I'll see you next time on And